Mr. Lofthouse. Wren turned to find Miss Flora standing on the threshold. She appeared not so astonished to see him as Wren might have expected. On the contrary, she seemed almost annoyed. The same housemaid who'd let Wren into the academy peered in at him over Miss Flora's shoulder. "Miss Fairfield," Wren replied, avoiding the housemaid's gaze. "I'm happy to report that your fiancé is en route to his uncle's house here in Rochester for his convalescence." Miss Flora served him a blank stare. In a tone flatter even than Wren's own, she replied, "I'm equally delighted to hear it, though I do wonder at Mr. Grigsby sending you ahead of them all this way just to tell me." Wren, having no explanation, cleared his throat. In a voice far calmer than he felt, he added, "There is another matter as well." "I wish you would name it," said Miss Flora. Wren let his eyes flick over to the housemaid, who yet remained standing just behind Miss Flora, before returning his attention to Miss Flora herself. "I would prefer to state my business in confidence." A faint smile ghosted across the corners of Miss Flora's lips. "You may trust Suki with your life." The ironic echo did not escape Wren. "Very well. Do allow me to apologize for any inconvenience my visit may incur. If you were my only gentleman caller, Mr. Lofthouse, I should scarcely have any inconveniences whatsoever." Wren stared at her. She had spoken her words with nothing approaching affection. Indeed, her dry tone came very near to bitterness. With Felix as her betrothed, Wren could hardly blame her, though her candour surprised him. Still, good manners demanded he force out, "You flatter me, Miss Fairfield." "I do not," she returned, no less blunt than before. Wren thought it prudent to come straight to the point. "I regret as well that I must come to you with ill tidings. Certain papers have vanished from Mr. Grigsby's office in Staple Inn." Miss Flora raised her brows. Wren continued. "Have you heard anything, perhaps from Mr. Knoll himself, or from Mr. Tolhurst, of any suspicious persons lurking around Staple Inn in recent weeks, or noticed anything strange yourself on your own visit there?" Miss Flora looked as if the strangest thing she'd noticed was Wren standing before her now, yet all she said was, "I have not." Wren supposed that had been rather too much to hope for. Still, if you should recall anything of the sort in the future, may I ask that you write and tell me of it? "Write to you?" Miss Flora echoed. "And not to Mr. Grigsby?" Wren's intended speech died on his tongue. Miss Flora studied his face with eyes that suddenly seemed all too canny. "Would I be correct in presuming Mr. Grigsby is not yet informed of the loss of these certain papers?" Too late, Wren realized everything he'd let slip despite his efforts at subterfuge. Miss Flora had proven more astute by half than he'd given her credit for. As he watched her expression, willing his own into an impassive mask, he thought he detected the wisp of a smile in her eyes. Yet to his surprise, it did not seem an unkind smile. He dared not look at Suki. "If at all possible," Wren said after a moment's contemplation, "I should like to recover the papers without causing Mr. Grigsby undue distress. Not, technically speaking, a lie." Miss Flora fixed him with a gaze that made him feel as if he were an object in a still-life watercolour exercise. "I appreciate your taking me into your confidence, Mr. Lofthouse. Perhaps I might one day return the favour." And managed to disguise his astonishment. Barely. He couldn't begin to fathom what secrets a young lady like her could possibly have. "For today, however," Miss Flora continued, as if she hadn't said anything at all alarming, "I have some particular questions for you regarding the trust left to me by my family." "I shall do my best to answer them," Wren replied when he'd recovered his composure. He could do little else. "How much may I withdraw from my trust before I attain my majority, by either reaching my 21st birthday or by marrying?" Wren attempted to disguise his bewilderment as he named the sum. Miss Flora didn't seem satisfied with the answer. "And there is no way to withdraw anything further?" "I'm afraid not," said Wren, his unease only growing. Her questions reminded him all too well of Felix's repeated visits to Staple Inn. Wren attempted a delicate inquiry. "Mr. Knoll has told you how he stands with his own trust?" "He has not told me of his debts himself, if that's what you're asking," said Miss Flora, "but I have heard of them. To my knowledge, they are considerable." This revelation made Wren's position a great deal less awkward. "If you're intending to wipe out his debts with your own fortune, I am not." Wren, who'd been on the brink of warning her against that action, choked on his own admonition. Then, if I may be so bold as to ask, what are your intentions? You may ask as boldly as you please, Mr. Lofthouse. Whether or not you shall receive an answer is another matter altogether. An astonished laugh escaped Wren. He hastily turned it into a cough, which allowed him to compose himself beneath his handkerchief. I hope you won't think me too forward, Wren ventured after he recovered his breath. If I remind you it is within your power to break off the engagement, for whatever reason, whenever you see fit, and with your guardian's complete confidence. Miss Flora said nothing. In gentler tones, Wren added, even such infamy as a broken engagement may be lived down in time. Miss Flora shot him a disdainful look. Have you lived down such infamy, Mr. Lofthouse? I haven't, Wren admitted, though if whoever now held his manuscripts should bring them to light, he would have to live down far worse infamy than Miss Flora might ever encounter in all her days. A faint curl came to Miss Flora's lips. While I admit I have not quite the regard for Felix that a wife ought to have for her husband, it is advantageous to me to remain engaged, for many reasons, not least of which is a betrothal does a great deal to discourage other would-be suitors.